Hey, thanks for joining us here at Faith Online. We hope that you're encouraged and challenged by today's message. And if you'd like to learn more about who we are as a church and how you can stay connected, head over to faithishere.org right after this video.
My name is Adam Smith, and I'm coming at you guys from California. I planted a, thank you. My dad's here, so, no, I'm just kidding. I planted a church out there about 6 years ago, and we actually got started in a nightclub, and so that's why I have a deep appreciation for rowdy people in church, because if you just think about the type of people who would be attracted to go to church in a nightclub for a second, we're just glad if they're sober, you know what I mean, on Sunday morning. We actually had a guy, this happened we had a guy who woke up in the nightclub we were at, didn't know he was at church. Think about what a rude awakening that was, you know what I mean? Welcome to church, buddy. What's going on? He was really paranoid, and now he's an usher. So it's awesome. God just can transform people's lives. My family didn't get to come out with me, but I did bring a picture of them so you guys could get to know them a little bit. Right? All the girls were like, oh, the guys were like, I don't know, it looks like a family. I don't know, it looks, you can't even tell I photoshopped myself with these really pretty people. It's like you barely can't even tell it. This is my family. That's my wife, Gretchen. It's the tall woman right there by my side. And any moms in here, like, picture day is like the most stressful day ever. You just be honest about that. And there's that thing where you're like, you're trying to be pleasant and you're trying to be nice and we're coordinating outfits, and why can't you kids just understand we just need to get one shot, you know? And it's just so frustrating, you know? And you're trying, like, you're yelling at your kids, but like this, you know, you have this smiley face, but all the anger is coming out, right? And this is my wife trying to pretend she didn't yell at our kids a few minutes before this, try and get them together. Some of you are like, why didn't you use the good shot? This is the good shot. This is as good as it got, you guys. On the right there is my daughter Tegan, and she's singing, because that's what you do at a portrait session. You just sing a song and just ignore the camera. The kid in the middle who's staring straight towards the camera in a very serious fashion, his name is Cohen, and we call him the lawyer behind his back. Don't tell him I told you that. I don't know, does anybody have a kid who's just like, everything is serious and intentional? They have a day planner at the age of 3, you know what I mean? Like, everything is very itemized, and I was told this, and Dad, you promised, and why aren't we there? And I have an appointment after this, and there are chores that need to be done, and why can't you guys get it together and obey Mom, right? That's him, and we're gonna live off him someday, because he's clearly the one that's gonna make some of himself. And then the one on the left in the zebra shirt that doesn't match anyone, that is Zeke. His name is Ezekiel. We call him Zeke or Ezekiel Bear, or just the Bear. I don't know why you guys needed to know all the nicknames, but they're already out there. And he's very, like, he stepped in something. I don't know what's happening in the picture. He's very distracted. If anybody remembers the Dennis the Menace, like, that's this kid right here. He's like a little redheaded kid, and he's just into everything, and he's also allergic to everything, you know, on the planet. Anybody like gluten-free, you know, soy-free, taste-free, like, that's his life. He doesn't know anything that tastes delicious. That's this kid. And so I left them behind in California to come spend 4 days with the teenagers here in South Carolina. And I couldn't be more excited about what God is about ready to do in this church and through our students. And so, and I just have a lot of love for this church. I actually had the privilege to go to college with a couple of the Burbacher kids, and I still like their family. And so that tells you a lot there, and just a lot of respect for your pastor. And I don't know if, because probably a lot of you have gone to this church for a while, or maybe this has been one of your only church experiences. You may not know, it is incredibly rare for a church to have one devoted pastor for as long as you have, who loves a singular community and lays his life down on its behalf. And that's amazing, and you really should be proud of that. It's a big deal. And man, it's like every time I check in with what's going on here, you guys are planting more campuses and expanding and just seeing God take things to the next level. And I love it when you have a pastor who's just as passionate about reaching people as the day he launched. And that's what you guys have. And I want to let you know, if it's been a while since you've said thank you or we appreciate you, you can always write that thank you card or send that email or give those gift cards or large financial donations to him personally. He will accept all of that. A car. I mean, I don't know what you're working with, okay? I'm just saying he said that I could say that. So, what? So let's get into it today. We're going to be in the book of Luke chapter 7. And in just a few minutes, if you want to go ahead and turn there and hold your place. And I hope that you take some notes this morning, write some things down that you feel like God is speaking to you or saying to you through this message, something that you're like, man, I'm going to tweet that, Facebook that out, embroider that on a pillow, get a lower back tattoo of that. I don't know what you do with quotes from sermons, but write something down today. And the title of my message, if you're taking notes, is You're Not Supposed to Be Here. You're not supposed to be here. I'm not telling you that. That's just the title of the message. You're not supposed to be here. And if you're not taking notes, same title. So that's how titles work. It's just the same across the board. Now, I don't know, how many of you have ever had the feeling you showed up somewhere and you quickly realized, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. Anybody ever have that kind of feeling before? You just fish out of water experience. You just felt like, man, this is uncomfortable. I feel like everyone's looking at me. I feel like I shouldn't really be in this environment. And maybe that kind of came from within. Maybe it came from some external cues to where you got kind of clued into the fact that you stood out. And I've had quite a few of these experiences in my life. One was when I was in college. I went to Central Bible College, and I had this roommate. His name was Travis, and he wanted to be a firefighter, which is weird that you would go to a Bible school to become a firefighter, but that was his journey. And so he was there, and so he was a volunteer firefighter, and he would get these calls, and I'd be hanging out with him, and it almost felt like he was a superhero, you know what I mean? Which was kind of fun to hang out with him, because he'd get these calls, and immediately he'd snap into action and race off, and just go, to save the world. The issue with that was, if you happened to be in the car with him, you were going to a fire. That was happening. It didn't matter that you were late to work, you know what I mean, that he was taking you to a study somewhere, or you were going to a funeral. You were now going to a fire. That was your life. You just needed to accept and embrace that reality. And so there was quite a few times where we'd be driving down the road and he'd get some call and he'd turn up the walkie-talkie and he's like, steer for a second. And I was like, this doesn't feel safe to me, you know what I mean? And he's listening to the call and he's like, we gotta go! And he would just immediately just whip the car around and start going. He had this Jeep Grand Cherokee and it was this old thing, and he would just jump a median, he would run lights. I don't know, with the volunteer fire people, what kind of liberty they have with traffic laws. But he took all the liberties, okay? Maybe a few that he wasn't given, right? He had this little red siren. I don't know if they gave it to him, if he bought it on the black market. Neither would surprise me. And he would slap it on the roof and just start driving there. There was one time where we were driving around trying to find this fire, and he could see where it was, but there was this giant cornfield between where we were and where that was, and he couldn't figure out how to get there. And he's like, we're going for it, man. And he just floors it. He goes down in this ditch, and we come up, and we're just plowing through this cornfield. In a Jeep Grand Cherokee, there's stuff flying up, scarecrows, there's wild animals that are just springing up out of nowhere. I'm panicking, I'm screaming. We finally get there. He jumps out, and he goes, and he's fighting this fire. And so, multiple times, you guys, I ended up on the edge of just a fire, just hanging out, right? As you do. So we're just hanging out there, watching someone's dreams burn down. It's a grim situation, okay? And at first it was exciting because I don't know if you know this, but men like fire, okay? It's just an instinctive thing that God put in us. I can't fully explain it. You could be very sophisticated and someone lights something on fire and you're like, ooh. It's just fun, something about it. And then you want to put meat on it and eat that later. It's just the way we're made, okay? And so, but then after a while, it's I'm at so many of these. And a lot of times I'd be dressed for class and I'm wearing a button-up shirt and a tie. And, I'm all dressed up for something. And I'm just standing on the edge of a fire reading a Greek textbook, you know what I mean? Just trying to bide my time. And it was awkward. I clearly was a little bit out of place. Anytime there's just somebody standing on the edge of the fire, dressed up and just reading a book, isn't that the guy in the CSI episode that always started the fire? He's the one they're looking for, right? And that was me when they're reviewing the tapes. They're like, it was that guy. It probably didn't help that I was always like, that probably gave the wrong impression. But I would be standing on the edge of these fires, and eventually one of the people that was fighting the fire would come up to me and be like, what are you doing here? Probably because I looked suspicious and they wanted to arrest me. And I'm like, I'm just hanging out, I had a fire. They're like, do you live here? And I'm like, nah, I just came with a guy. Just thought I'd get some reading done. And they're like, it would always end with them being like, you're not supposed to be here. You shouldn't be in this environment. Like, you're going to breathe in this smoke. It's going to be a bad situation for you. Like, you can't be close to what's going on. You don't have any protection from like the elements and what's happening. Like, you're not technically supposed to be here. And I knew that, but it also felt weird being told that because we hate that realization. You hate showing up somewhere and realizing that you're not supposed to be there. And yet you've probably had that experience on quite a few occasions. Maybe for you it was like something that happened at work where you showed up for a meeting and people were talking and it became really evident that everybody else got a memo you did not receive, that everybody else read some sort of a book or a new policy that you weren't clued into. And it just felt very quickly like, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not clued into what's going on. I don't belong in this room around this conference table. Or maybe for you, like it was some sort of a formal event that nobody told you was formal. And so you showed up in cargo shorts and that did not play well, especially with your girl, right? She did not think that was cute or adorable. And you just felt like, this is awkward. I feel like I'm not supposed to be here at a wedding in these cargo shorts. But I will be stuffing the pockets full of free buffet food, right? Because you're not going to waste an opportunity, right? But we have these moments inside of our lives where we realize this is a context in which I do not belong. I'm out of place. I don't fit in with these people. And the reason I bring this up is because when I talk to people out in California, our church, we consider ourselves to be on the mission field. We're reaching people who are vastly unchristian or de-Christian or non-Christian people. And in talking to them and listening to their stories, what a lot of people identify is having this feeling the last time they remember having a church experience. That they walked in and the feeling was, I'm not supposed to be here. In fact, when I travel and I get to talk and teach and be around teenagers, I hear a lot of teenagers saying, like, a lot of times when I go into a church environment, especially on a Sunday morning, and my mom wants me to be there, and my grandma carts me there, and I get there and I show up, and I feel like everyone's looking at me. I feel like I'm not supposed to be there, like I don't belong, I don't fit, like I clearly am the one who stands out, and there's this thing in my brain that just says, don't go back there, that's not your place, those are not your people. And I don't know if you know people like this in your life, that maybe you've tried to invite to church, that maybe you've tried to share your faith with, that maybe you've tried to reach out to, and they have this kind of this sense that like, I wouldn't belong there. I wouldn't fit in. They wouldn't want me around. I hear this one a lot. If I stepped into that building, the roof would cave in because of the things that I've done and been wrapped up in and involved with. And I think a lot of times people begin to equate this experience that they have at the church with an experience that they've somehow had with God. And people begin to walk away with this idea that, like, if that's what people that represent God, if that's what God's people think of me, that must be what God thinks of me. That when I walk into a place where God is supposed to be represented, that I think that maybe God is embarrassed by me. I think that maybe God is ashamed of me and the things that I've done and the places I've been. I think that God looks through me and knows that I don't belong here. And I think you would be surprised at how many people have this question buried somewhere in their soul. This question of, what does God think of me? And I want to approach that today because I think it's a significant question, and I think we have tremendous power as the people of God to define what God is like for a generation who is desperate to know. And so I want to dive into this today. Luke chapter 7. If you have your own Bible, just yell, I got it. All righty. And if not, we're going to put on the screens for you so you can read along. Luke chapter 7, verse 36. And this is the story of Jesus at a dinner party. It says that one of the Pharisees, these religious people, they asked Jesus to come have dinner with them. And so when Jesus went to his home and sat down to eat, and a certain immoral woman from that city. Now, I'll just pause right there. Don't you love how incredibly intentionally vague that is? A certain immoral woman from the city. And the subtext is this: I think we all know who I'm talking about. You ever had that experience before? You ever talk about somebody without technically talking about them before? Just a quick show of hands. A lot of liars in here. People not raising their hand. You know you've done this, okay? We'll just do an altar call later just for those people. Lying in church, come on, people. We've had these experiences like where, we just like, we talk about them. We have things to say, but we don't want to say it outright. We're like, well, a certain someone, I don't want to mention any names, but okay, it was Denise. You know what I mean? Like, and you're looking around, everybody's like, yeah, I knew it was her. Sorry if your name's Denise. We all love you, just by the way. But I think this is actually a huge indicator of exclusivity. These sorts of moments in which, I think that you've created this sort of closed culture where you are. If when new people step into your circle, your instinct is to talk about them and not to them. That's exclusivity. You stepped into a place in which you don't belong, and we're going to whisper about you. We're going to reference you. We're going to point across you the room. We've had these experiences where we're like, what's she doing here? Man, I can't believe she would show her face here after what she did, because I don't know. I mean, I heard this. I can't corroborate it or not, but that won't stop me from sharing this rumor with you guys. But I heard that this took place, and if that's true, I don't know why she would be coming in here and being around these people, and just there's this buzz that comes up. I can't believe that someone like that would think they could come into here. And I'll just tell you, the truth of the matter is that if you act like it would be weird for someone like that to be here, whatever that is for you, they won't show up anymore. Because the truth of the matter is, nobody wants to be where they're not wanted. You don't want to be where you're not wanted. And here's the thing, you can tell, can't you? You can tell when you enter a room and people don't want you there. Where people don't think that you belong. And this was definitely the feeling that this woman had as she entered into this room. This certain immoral woman walks into this dinner party that's being held, and Jesus is the guest of honor. And it's a bunch of religious people gathered to listen to and hear from this prophet, this guru, this man who claimed to be God named Jesus. And she walks in and everything freezes, because everybody would instantly have known that she's the one who's out of place. Anybody ever used to watch Sesame Street back in the day, or maybe yesterday? I don't know what your life is like, okay? Or how you relax and wind down. But they had that little segment that was like, they'd show you 4 things, and it would be like, one of these things is not like the other one. One of these things just isn't the same. Anybody remember that back in the day? You remember how confusing that was as a small child, like really trying hard to figure out? I brought a picture in case you don't remember this segment. They'd show you something like this, and this would break your brain when you were like 4 years old. You had no idea what to do with this picture. You're like, one of these things isn't the same. I don't know. Okay, there's a fire hat and a fire hat and a fire hat and a fire chief hat? What is that? Is that a Hershey kit? I don't know. And you felt so confused. You felt like it was a trick. And yet as you grow older, it's like, this is extremely obvious. Like, we all know which thing doesn't belong. The sequin hat is a little bit out of place, which is how they knew I wasn't supposed to be on the edge of a fire, because I always wore a sequin hat. No, that's never happened. Just kidding. But this is how obviously this woman would have stood out in this environment. Like a bright sequin hat in the midst of a bunch of fire hats. Like, they would have known that she didn't belong, because honestly, there were 4 types of people in this room at this dinner party, and she was the one that didn't belong. She was the one on the very end. I'll list them for you. You got Jesus. He's clearly in a category by himself. He is God in human form. He's brilliant. He's an incredible teacher and thinker, and he's perfect. That's intimidating. Then you have the Pharisees, and these are like the church people, okay? These are the people that have grown up in church their whole life, okay? They were born under a pew. You know these types of people? People who are just like, I prefer the King James Bible because I was there when it got wrote. You know what I mean? Like, the religious people, right? That was my favorite story. I knew Jonah. You know what I mean? Like that. There's a connection there. And so they know the rules. They know the expectations. They know what you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to say, when you're supposed to come and go, and what you're supposed to wear, and how things are supposed to work, so that you can fit into the religious culture of the day. Then you got the disciples, the third kind of category of people. These are like the new Christians. These people just came to faith in Jesus. They don't even know fully what they bought into. They just know that Jesus is doing something incredible, and they want in. These are like the people who have just recently come to faith, who are just like, I love that church, but they don't even know the name of it yet. You know what I mean? They're still learning. Like, that's my favorite worship song. What's it about? I have no idea, but I love it. And they're just stoked. They're excited to be there. They're watching what Jesus is going to do. And then you have, on the very tail end, the kind of sequin hat, the thing that doesn't belong, this immoral woman who is broken, and she has a bad reputation. When she steps into almost any room, people talk about her. People whisper about her. People all know her story. You don't even have to say her name, as people already know her reputation. And she clearly doesn't belong. She doesn't fit. And the second she walks in the door, everybody's whispering. Everybody's talking about the fact that she's there. Everyone's talking about her. No one's talking to her. And then she does something that really only makes it worse. It says in verse 37, it says, when a certain immoral woman from that city heard that Jesus was eating there, she brought a beautiful alabaster jar filled with expensive perfume. And when she knelt behind him at his feet, weeping, her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them off with her hair, and she kept kissing his feet and putting perfume on them. And this may sound kind of beautiful and poetic to you if you kind of came up in the church and you're familiar with this story, but the rest of us are just thinking, that's weird. That's a little bit weird, a little bit awkward, a little bit of an uncomfortable situation. And maybe you're thinking like, well, maybe there's some like just cultural barriers, some things that were applicable in the first century that maybe I just don't understand. And that is true. There are some things different about the washing of feet and things. But even in the context of this culture, this is a weird scene. This is an uncomfortable thing that's happening, that's unraveling. And maybe that's kind of difficult for you to see. And so let me contextualize this into your life, your situation, what you might experience if this happened today. Let's say that you decide you're going to go out with some friends to the Olive Garden. Any fans of the Olive Garden out there? Yeah, for real. That was clearly less cheering than I was expecting. Maybe y'all don't know about the free unlimited breadsticks, okay? The dipping sauces, the salad. It's kind of next level, just FYI. Some of you look confused. Let me show you a picture in case you've never seen one. This is the Olive Garden. Hey, Burbachers eat free. It's awesome. That's clearly where they're going to lunch. That's all the Burbachers I know would never pass up a deal, okay? That's just from my experience with the family. If there's a free sign, they're going, okay? So let's say that you go into an Olive Garden. You're going to hang out with some church people. You're going to have dinner with a bunch of people that you know, they're kind of your friends. You all go to the same church, and you're going to fellowship with them. That's what we call it when it's the Christian version, right? We can't just have dinner. We fellowship. And so you're fellowshipping at the Olive Garden, and you're literally breaking bread with the free unlimited breadsticks, as I previously mentioned. And you're enjoying yourself. You're having a good time. You're talking. You're kind of mixing up with friends. And all of a sudden, the doors fly open, and this woman walks in, and it becomes very immediately clear that she's a prostitute. And you start to feel very uncomfortable. Some of you are like, how would I know she was a prostitute? Picture what you think a prostitute would look like. That's how she's dressed, okay? You're like, that part is way too low cut. That part is way too high cut, okay? You need to change the whole outfit. And she comes in and she's clearly looking around for somebody. And you're like, man, who is she trying to find? Who's she looking for? And you're confused. And people are starting to kind of notice. People are starting to kind of look over that way and kind of rubberneck a little bit, trying to like, what's going on over there? And she's carrying with her this jar of perfume. I don't know what kind. The Bible doesn't really specify. Maybe it was something like Curious, the fun, flirty fragrance from pop super sensation Britney Spears. Okay, I don't know. But just as an example, okay? And she's carrying that with her, and she's looking for somebody, and then she has that look on her face like, oh, I see who I'm looking for. But she's looking at your table. In fact, she's looking at the guy across from you. There's like 3 of you couples at the table, and you're sitting across from this guy who's like the most religious of the religious. Like, he's the head usher, the guy who leads like the marriage recovery classes, you know? Always doing the men's breakfasts and always posting like the scripture quotes on his Facebook wall. It's that guy, and she's looking directly at him. And you notice that she notices him, and you're like, oh, it's about to get crazy, right? You ever had that experience where like you kind of know something's about to go down, and you're like, I should say something or wait to see what happens, right? Because you kind of want to just let it unfold naturally, right? And so you don't say anything, and you're just kind of letting it go. And it's for sure, it really is him, because she starts walking towards your table, and your heart's like beating fast, and you're like, what is going to happen? What's going to happen? And she gets about halfway to your table, and she starts crying. And it's not like a little sniffle. It's just like when people just unleash like just ugly cry, where there's like mascara everywhere, and there's like, you can't control it, and you get the little snot bubble that comes out. You know what I'm talking about. Don't pretend like you're better than that. You know what I'm talking about. And it's just nasty, and just like, and where you can't control it, and you're just like, she has to stop and like balance herself on somebody else's table. And like and then she moves all the way, she keeps going, she gets all the way up to your table. Now she's standing at your table. All these people in the restaurant, they stop what they're doing, and they're just looking on. And they know that your table is the table from that specific church. They know that you're religious people. And so they're really looking over, being like, what is going on? There's people just eating up breadsticks like, oh yeah. The drama is about to unfold. There's people looking for cameras from maybe a cop's crew. People think they're gonna be on TV. And she stops, and she's looking directly at this guy at your table. And you're looking at him like, what? And his wife's looking at him like, you better not know her. I don't know what's happening right now, but I better be getting punked. And then she drops down to the ground, and she crawls up under the table, and now you're like, this is really getting weird. And she pops his shoes off and takes his socks off. And she takes this thing of perfume. We don't know what kind. Maybe it was like, something like Curious, the fun, flirty fragrance from Britney Spears, the pop singer. You guys know who she is. And so maybe they uncork that, and she starts pouring it on his feet, and she's still weeping. She's still crying. And now everybody's standing up. They're looking on at the scene unfolding inside of the restaurant. And she doesn't know how to wipe his feet up after she's crying and pouring this. And so she's got her hair up in a bun, and she takes out the little scrunchie, and she does like the hair shake thing. And she starts drying his feet off with her hair. And at this point, the wife is just like, you got a lot of explaining to do. And everyone's tense, and it's uncomfortable. And everyone's looking directly at that guy, being like, are you going to address this situation? This is what's unfolding inside of Scripture. This is how awkward this moment would have been. And it says in verse 39 that when the Pharisee, this religious guy who's sitting at the table with Jesus, the guy who invited him, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. She's a sinner. Only it has an exclamation point. She's a sinner! I love that it says, he said to himself. He's talking to himself. But he's still yelling. Like, I just want to see that unfold. I can't run around. She's a sinner! Whoa! And he scares himself. Honey, you're doing it again. You're talking to yourself with exclamation points. It's scaring the children. I got to tell you, I've read this story so many times, and every time I do, I have this specific phrase underlined in my Bible. Kind of woman. Kind of woman. And it's underlined not because it makes me feel good, but because it makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel sick to my stomach when I read it. Kind of woman. There's something about it that stirs up an anger inside of me when I read that phrase in the context of the story, because it just makes me feel like it's a sentence that doesn't belong here. It feels so arrogant, so cocky, so condescending. I can't believe he doesn't know what kind of woman is touching him. And it doesn't just make me mad, but it actually, if you read on in the story, it makes Jesus mad. In verse 40, it says, "Then Jesus answered his thoughts." How scary is that, by the way? He thinks something, Jesus is like, "I heard that." He's like, "What?" "Yeah, I can hear thoughts. Not all of them." "Yeah, all of them." "I gotta go." You know what I mean? It's very uncomfortable. He says to this man, he says, "Simon," he said to the Pharisee, "I have something to say to you." Which tells you that he's angry. Because you don't tell somebody you're going to tell them something. You just tell them unless you're really angry. And then you got to preface it, right? You ever do that with your kids? "Oh, I got something to tell you. I'm going to tell you." "Tell me." "Oh, I'm going to tell you what I got to say." And then if you're like me, you're a little bit ADD, so you forget, you know what you were going to. "I'm so mad, I will wait till later." You just don't remember. I picture Jesus saying this to this man like through gritted teeth, like he doesn't want to sink to his level. And then Jesus launches into this story about his frustration with religious people's tendency to want to keep outsiders on the outside. And it's clear that the story comes out of frustration with these particular people and the way they're treating this woman. And you know what makes him so angry in that moment? It wasn't that the moment was awkward. It wasn't that she created a scene. That's not what Jesus is frustrating about. What angered Jesus in this moment was that people who claimed to speak on behalf of God acted as if this particular person didn't belong here. That she was less than everyone else. That she was some kind of human trash. That she didn't deserve to be in the room, let alone at the table. That her kind didn't belong in here. And let me just be really blunt with you this morning. Getting offended over the inclusion of certain kinds of people offends Jesus. To his core. Because in the mind of God, there are not certain kinds of people, there's just people. This is the way in which God views the world. You see, it's not God who sections humanity off into different types of people. It's us. It's us who get tribal and need to create boundaries with which to say, I'm on the inside and you're on the outside. I'm one of God's and you are not. But this isn't the way God sees the world. When God looks at humanity, he just sees people. He sees imperfect people, people trying to figure things out, people trying to figure themselves out, people wrestling with who they are and what in the world they're doing here on this planet, circling the sun, like people that are wondering why certain things have happened to them in their life. People wondering why they hurt so bad on the inside. Why people wondering like if they're worth anything, if their life matters, if they have what it takes. God looks at humanity, he just sees people. One kind of people, his people. People he made, his creation with whom he is madly in love. He sees people stumbling towards happiness and fulfillment and connection. People who just want to feel something real in life. People who just, they want to be and do more than just barely survive. And so I would be very careful because this is a temptation of humanity. And specifically for those of us who have spent a lot of time inside of the church, we can, if we're not careful, we can give into this temptation to mistakenly think that we are God's people and other people aren't. But that's just not true. Because there's only one kind of people, God's people. You know why the woman was in the room that day? Because she already knew that this was how Jesus saw the world. Because at some point, this woman who had done so many things she wasn't proud of, she'd lost count. There's no way she could even keep track. At some point in her life, she came across someone who spoke on behalf of God that actually looked her in the eyes. That when they looked at her not with condescension, but with compassion. They saw her as a person to be loved, not a product to be used. One day, she met someone who didn't want anything from her, but wanted everything for her, who really listened to her like she mattered, like her story was significant, and who told her that she was worth so much more than what she had settled for, who told her, a person who had never had people with which she felt like she belonged, who never had people that she called her people. One day she had someone who looked her in the eye and in all of her brokenness said, "You are my people." And that person happened to be the one person whose opinion actually matters, the God of the universe, Jesus Christ. See, this would have been an unheard of situation for a prostitute in the first century. No one who fit that description would have ever experienced anything like this at all. It would have been unheard of to be honored in this way, to be treated with dignity. Not that kind of woman. So why did she show up there? Why did she make a fool of herself? Because she loved Jesus. But why did she love Jesus? The answer is not that complicated. She loved Jesus for the same reason we all love Jesus, because he loved you first. With no strings attached. When you had nothing to offer and nothing to give but your brokenness, Jesus saw you, and he included you. He spoke to you. He spoke life into you, and it changed something in you. And the same thing had happened to her. She had never experienced anyone who cared enough for her to connect with her on such a deep and intimate level. I think a lot of times we make this mistake inside of religious circles, where we make the mistake of condemning people for where they are without any consideration for how they got there. And let me tell you, the backstory is of paramount importance, is it not? A lot of times we have interactions with people in which we want to tell them how it is and what they need to do and what's wrong in their lives. We want to tell them that, they're being sinful and their behavior is short-sighted, it's self-centered, and it's soul-starving. But we don't ask the question, I wonder what kind of personal pain led you to that place. And that question is everything. Let me tell you something about the way humanity works. Something about all the people you have ever known in your entire life. If you can't validate their pain, they don't care about your plan. If you can't validate their pain, they don't care about your plan. You ever have somebody who doesn't really know or didn't care enough or didn't take the time to really get to know you, tell you what you ought to do with your life? What was your reaction? It probably wasn't, you know what, you have a great point. Thank you so much for speaking into, man, wow. I feel like I should tip you. I don't know what is appropriate. Thank you for telling me how to parent my children at this park right now. I really am grateful. No, you didn't do that, right? The first thing you thought was, you don't know me. You got your crazy eyes going? Who you think you are? You don't know my story. Okay? This is how these kids deserve to be treated. You don't know anything. You don't know what happened in the van on the way over here? You mind your own business. We live our own lives. And you wanted to slap them, but you didn't because you're trying to follow Jesus. And we think yeah, I want that. For me, I want people to get to know me, but here's the deal. I think I know all there is to know about the people in my life. I mean, seriously, I can help them. Okay, they need to hear my advice. Like if they would just do this, they're being self-destructive. I mean, they're limiting their own options. They're not thinking things through. They're living in sin. Like they're not considering their future. They're not thinking clearly. They're being selfish. They're not living up to their potential. They're definitely not following God's plan. But whoever came to mind when I said all those things, whoever that person is in your life, they don't care that those things are true. This woman didn't care. I'll tell you something about this particular story. Everyone in the room with Jesus had a plan to improve this woman's life, but only Jesus validated her pain. Only Jesus acknowledged where she's been and how hard it is. Only Jesus loved her from where she was at. The Bible says that God is Emmanuel. It's this word that means this, that God is a God who is with us, who doesn't stand at a distance and tell us what to do, who gets down in the muck of daily life with us, who feels our pain, who jumps into our situation, who gets into our context and crawls into our culture and feels what we feel and wraps an arm around us from the midst of the circumstance we find ourselves in and says, I am with you. Before he directs us to move on from where we are, he gets in the middle of where we're at. This is what makes God such a powerful figure. This is what makes Jesus such a moving character, is that this is what he does. See, the church was never meant to be a center for shaming people. That's not what we're doing here. And sometimes we can be here so long that we click into that mode where we think like, but they're a sinner. And so are you. But they're going to hell. That may be true, but I'll tell you this, the threat of a future hell to someone who's presently living one isn't going to get you much traction. I've had this conversation plenty with people. You threaten somebody with hell. I've had this happen to me so many times where people will look back at me dead in the eye and said, I already lived there. Do you know what my life is like? I guarantee you the experiences, if we could crawl into this woman's story, she lived in hell. The way she was treated, the way she was spoken to, the way she was used up by people who took advantage of her. What changed this woman's life wasn't the threat of hell later. It was the potential for hope right here and now. That's what's powerful. And in reality, that's what the church is about. It's about extending to people a hope that begins right here and now. When Jesus was here on earth, he talked about this idea of heaven, not just that was something that we could someday get to, but he said that the kingdom of heaven is right here and now. And when you enter into the reality of how God really sees you, and what he sees when he looks at you, and what he believes about you, and how you were actually made, and what he has in store for your future, heaven will enter your heart in the here and now. And even in the midst of a surrounding that feels like hell, you can experience heaven through Jesus right here today. This is why we exist. This is why your church exists. You exist to give hope to people. I'll tell you something, I know your pastor well enough to know this. His goal for this church is not that you would just kind of hang tight with this group of religious people and eat breadsticks and just wait for Jesus to come back. It's never going to be good enough. If that was good enough for that man, you wouldn't be planting campuses all over this state. You wouldn't be taking on building projects. You definitely wouldn't set aside time every year just to reach teenagers. You see, the purpose of this church is really God's purpose for the church, which is to always be extending hope to people who don't yet know that they belong in the building. That's what the church is for. You see, that's why at this particular church that you have the privilege of getting to serve into, this is a place in which we say we're family, but when you walk in the door, you just became family too. And I don't know what kind of feeling you've ever had about the church or about Christians or about Christianity. And I know you may have had some experiences in which you had this gut feeling that told you, you don't belong, you're not supposed to be here. But I'm here to tell you, I had the same feeling once upon a time. As somebody who genuinely reflected Jesus said, you got the wrong information. The God of the universe is madly in love with you. He's been with you all along. And if you open your eyes and your heart to him, everything can change for you. I think that there are a lot of stories in this community that have yet to be told. I think that this week there is an awakening that is awaiting to happen in the students of this city. And I think that God's expectations are exponentially high. You see, when I think about awakening, I think it really means two things to me. It means first and foremost that we believe that God is going to wake up a teenage culture, a generation of people to understand that when you place your faith and your passion and your effort behind your relationship with God, life takes on a meaning. That like all this sense of competing and trying to prove you're good enough can fade to the background and you find purpose and belonging. But the other side of awakening is this, it's the awakening of the church, of people who are already here, of people who can barely remember those teenage days, waking up to what it felt like to walk into a high school or a junior high and feel like you don't even belong in your own skin. That you're not supposed to be here, that you're striving, that you're trying to prove yourself, that you're just trying to fit in, you're trying to make it through the day without being made fun of, without being chastised, without people writing horrible things about you on the internet. You're just trying to sneak by under the radar. And an awakening is really about the church waking up to its mission to be the kind of place where when young people walk in who do not look like you or talk like you or dress like you or think like you, and they haven't experienced the same kind of culture you have, that you look at them and you show them Jesus. A Jesus who picks up their head and looks in their eye and says, I want to know your story. I want to know what you've gone through. I'm for you. Let me crawl into your world, into your culture, and show you love. And it's in those moments in which we are validated, in which our pain is heard, that our plan is received. I believe that God has something specific he wants to do this week. And I want to invite you to do something with me as we close our service today. If you believe that God wants to do something significant in this city, that he wants to begin a revival in the hearts of young people that becomes infectious and spreads through these schools like wildfire. If you believe that God wants to communicate to the hearts of teenagers who don't believe that they belong or that they fit or that they're supposed to be in a place called church, if you believe that God wants to grab hold of them and change their lives from the inside out, would you just stand to your feet with me this morning? Here's what I want us to do. I want us to pray for what's about ready to start tonight and echo through every night this week, on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I want us to pray together as a congregation that God would radically do something that blows us away. And I'll tell you this, if you remember what it was like to be a teenager, you know that one thing is for sure, you definitely need some people praying for you. And this is your moment. This may be the most important thing you do all week, is to set yourself and your agenda and what you want to have for lunch aside and simply focus on God and pray that He would transform the lives of teenagers this week. They're going to be bussed in all over this city. And so would you do this? Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? And would you, in your own words, don't let me do your praying for you, begin just praying out loud in your own words that God would begin to send His grace and His mercy in tangible ways to the teenagers of the city. And that people's chains would be broken, that addiction would slough off of people. That kids who are caught in patterns of abuse would escape this week. That students who caught up in the comparison trap would begin to be freed this week, knowing what the God of the universe actually really thinks of them. Begin praying right now in your own words. God, we humbly come before you this morning on behalf of a generation who desperately needs to know you, the real you. And God, I pray that right now you would begin to flood this building that sits behind us with your presence and your power. May this week there be a tangible feeling that when you walk in the room, that you can tell that God is there. God, I pray that there would be an understanding that when students are sitting in the room and hearing songs sang over them as they hear your word preached to them, that there would be a connection that takes place in the depths of their souls, and that they would believe that this is one place in my life where I can fully be me, in which I don't have to pretend or play games or prove anything, but I can simply be here with you, God, and you get me. You are with me. You are for me. And God, you have good things in store for my future. God, I pray for all the parents in this place who are desperate for God to grab a hold of their child. God, I pray that there would be a spirit of intercession that overcomes them this week. God, to pause in the middle of their workday, in the middle of their drive, and begin to pray for their students. And God, I pray that this week there would be an experience that takes place in students' lives that never leaves them the same. That in a world surrounded by people that are judging them, they experience the grace of a good God who loves them. And God, I pray that it would be the foothold that they need to move towards everything you have for them in their future. God, do the impossible and begin it right here at Faith, God. Right here, right now, Jesus. And if you want that for this church and for your kids, would you shout amen? Amen, amen.